how's doing business in China going. So actually today, that was the one of the theme of the U.S.-China Economic and the Security Review Committee's hearing. So this committee is a permanent body of Congress. So it mainly examined the U.S.-China relationship in 2021, and you can see the theme is emerging risks. So one of the person who testified at this hearing just talk about how CCP, quote, wields its law and regulations to maximize its power and control to detriment of foreign and domestic businesses. And so that's an international lawyer with 20 years of handling business laws for his clients in China and in the Europe. And his name is Dan Harris. Actually, he comes from, his law firm is in San Francisco. Yeah, he's a partner of this international law firm called the Harris Bricken. And so he said in his testimony is largely based on his experience, what he has seen while representing companies that doing business in China or trying to do business in China. And he said, it's mostly about how CCP wields its law and regulations, okay, to attack those businesses. So first of all, he talked about the fact that the CCP is cracking down on private business in China.
The CCP is cracking down on private businesses. We keep hearing about that, and it is happening. By way of an example, my law firm has represented many of the big US and Australian movie studios in their China legal matters, and several of them have remarked to us how China hates foreign movie companies. After learning how difficult it is to make a movie that passes China's censorship requirements, our response has always been that China hates all movie companies because they can speak at least somewhat directly to the Chinese people. China also does its utmost to wall off its internet from foreign companies. It does this by not giving foreign companies internet content provider licenses, which in turn forces them to pay Chinese companies that have their own ICP licenses, and they have to do that to legally get their websites on internet servers within China. The CCP does this with ICP licenses to maintain control over online content. Because Chinese domestic companies fear the CCP, they usually do not allow anything on the internet that the CCP might not want there. And if a Chinese company does put something on the internet that the CCP does not like, a Chinese government official can easily threaten that Chinese company with bad things if it doesn't stop, or it can even arrest someone on the spot. Doing this is to a company whose leadership in New York is considerably more complicated. The Chinese company that allows a New York company to use its ICP license will make sure the New York company does not put anything on the internet that might offend the CCP. The CCP also does not allow foreign companies to operate schools that teach Chinese children, and it recently banned private tutoring in core school subjects.
Yeah, so one might just wonder, does Chinese Communist government does not care about the foreign investment, or does not care about its own economy?
The answer to these questions today is the same answer I would have given 5, 10, and 15 years ago. China cares about both foreign investment and its own economy, but only to the extent that those bolster CCP power and help ensure its survival. As a lawyer, the best example I see of the tension between investment and economics on the one hand and CCP power and control on the other hand is actually China's court system. Our clients are always asking us about the fairness of China's courts, and my answer has always been the same. If you are suing a Chinese company for breaching your contract to make rubber duckies, you will get a fair trial. If you are suing a Chinese company, government company, for stealing your cutting edge semiconductor IP, well, good luck. Many China lawyers call this the 90-10 rule. 90% of the time, the Chinese courts will rule fairly because that allows its economy to function and that benefits the CCP. But when the case is itself important for the CCP, fairness instantly gets tossed out the window. Legal scholars describe this as rule by law as opposed to rule of law. The same is true for Chinese IPOs in the United States and for VIEs, variable interest entities, I think they're called. China allows select companies to IPO in the US, oftentimes via VIEs, because it wants the money. But if for any reason the balance shifts to prohibiting either of these things, the CCP will do so. VIEs are a classic example of how the CCP operates. China has allowed VIEs for at least a decade to secure foreign capital, but has never formally legalized them. And now that the CCP is making clear in various ways that it no longer values them as much, investors and underwriters are starting to panic. But this writing, actually more accurately, the lack of any writing, has been there all along for anyone interested in looking. The same is generally true for China's new laws and regulations on data privacy, which are geared more towards giving the Chinese government access to data than towards protecting Chinese consumers. These recently revised regulations have not changed much, if at all, from those that preceded them. The Chinese government has for years had essentially full access to all data, even data held by foreign companies operating overseas. The new laws mostly just reiterate and clarify this and should be viewed not so much as new laws, but as the CCP signaling that companies that collect data the CCP does not want them to collect or that seek to hide data from the CCP are at increased risk of the Chinese government taking action against them.
Then what should US government do about China?
President Xi does not care about world opinion, and he certainly does not care about being liked. He also does not care about following international law, rules, and customs. And why should he, when China's size and money and bullying have allowed them to get away with so much already? Because no country, including the United States, can exert much influence on Xi Jinping or the CCP, we should focus more on what we can do to keep growing our own economy, technology, and political standing, and less on how the U.S. can stop China from doing the same. The U.S. government should encourage U.S. companies and even companies from other countries to cease doing business in or with China, especially manufacturing. The U.S. government should also be forthright with American people about how, even if American companies reduce their manufacturing in China, we still should not expect a wholesale return of manufacturing to the United States. But every dollar that goes from China to Mexico or to Poland or to Thailand is a small victory for the United States. Virtually all my clients who have their products manufactured in China would like to have them made somewhere else. Invariably, one of three things are stopping them from exiting China. One, the upfront cost of moving. Two, a lack of knowledge on where to go and how to find a good manufacturer elsewhere. And three, for many of them, there are no viable alternatives to China for manufacturing their products. Number one can be ameliorated with subsidies and other incentives, the cost of moving out. Number two can be aided with information, how to figure out where to go. Number three will require the United States government to work with manufacturers in the United States and elsewhere to help them develop the necessary manufacturing capabilities. One thing I would like to add to the prior discussion, we're talking about the Chinese government monitoring human rights activists. The Chinese government also monitors American companies, even in the United States. if you talk to American companies, many of them will not send their people to government offices in DC, or at least they're reluctant to do so. And they oftentimes like to send proxies because they are convinced that the Chinese government films who goes in and out, and they do not want to be seen as essentially fighting against China.
And so then the committee of the U.S.-China Economic and Security Review, some members also curious about how he views the BlackRock's China investment strategy. So let's hear how he answers.
Okay.
All I will say is that I've had an interest in the market for a long time, and I even invested in Russian stocks when Boris Yeltsin got rid of, I believe it was his fourth prime minister. So I'm willing to take risks, but I have never put a penny in a Chinese company, and I ascribe that to being hit over the head too many times by reality. I view it as a very high-risk investment. I know BlackRock knows a lot more about investing than I do, but and it may be a good high-risk investment, but I think people should view it as a high-risk investment for the reasons that have come out today.
And also people ask, the members ask about what's the systematic risk in doing business in China. And Harris actually talked about the biggest risk he thinks in doing business in China.
What I view as one of the biggest, what I view as an even bigger risk is China insinuating itself into the United States and doing it via businesses, getting our IP, doing it with spies, doing it by sending people over here to work for American companies or working for American companies in China. And there's a lot of naivete on that. And our clients will say, well, you know, I've been friends with Mr. Zhang for 10 years. He would never do anything. And my response to that always is nothing against Mr. Zhang, who I'm sure is a great person. But do you really think that when the CCP knocks on his door and says, you need to give us this information or this data or this IP, or your parents' pension is going to be cut off, or something else very bad is going to happen, do you really think he's going to be able to withstand that? And that's an issue that really troubles me. And it troubles me in particular in the context of universities, because my father was a university professor, and I very much believe in academic freedom, but I know for a fact that there are spies in U.S. universities and colleges. And I talked with a company that actually monitors for spies in U.S. companies, and they say that in a lot of respects they're fairly easy to spot because they have a history of working for Chinese government companies, etc. And this company said that they called up a university and said, you have, I can't remember whether it was one or two, they called up a local university, spies in your X, Y, and Z department, or departments. They were in the sciences, and the university basically said, there's nothing we can do. And so that to me is the systemic risk, is the fact that there's this, people talk about decoupling, but right now there's a coupling. And it's a coupling that was not present during the Cold War with Russia. And I don't know how we handle that. And I certainly don't want to see a return to the way we handled it during World War II.
Yeah. So, and actually, this lawyer, Dan Harris, said his law firm's lawyer sees how CCP crush U.S. government every day in China in the past 20 years.